Hi, this is Brett Crane for EdTech 532. I'm going to try to talk real fast and get through this as quickly as I can because I want to make it under the 10-minute mark for YouTube. What we're supposed to do is do a learning theory mashup from different theories. So here's mine. First, my disclaimer. Hey, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, but at least I have experienced a few things, and so here's my best shot at it. Okay, my learning theory is going to be based, well, I'm going to call it Fluxx theory of learning. And what Fluxx is, well, it's actually a card game. And you can find this at Looney Labs, and you can look that up at looney.labs.com. But basically, the game is a card game where the rules are made up as you go. And I'm using this as a metaphor for my learning theory in that learning is situational. And the brain is essentially putty, and there's always change involved. And I'll explain that as I go on. But what I'm going to do is go ahead and do a learning mashup. I'm going to start off with this analogy of the Fluxx card game. Then I'm going to move on to constructivist learning theory. Then throw in some semantic mechanisms of humor, or linguistic script theory that I'll talk about a little bit more. And then I'm going to talk about what we know from modern neuroscience and kind of what's wrong with what we think about for learning styles and multiple intelligences. And then I'm going to talk about the plasticity of the brain. So let's start with constructivism. Basically, it's a theory, paradigm, worldview, whatever they're calling it, of learners creating their own meaning from the reality in which they experience things. And that new information or new learning happens because it's built upon prior understanding. And so what that basically, in a very, very general nutshell, is that we build learning on what we've already learned, and we continue to do that. And I'm not going to go into some of the details in that because I probably just don't have the time, but suffice it to say, that's where I want to start. And then let me talk a little bit about semantic mechanisms of humor. Now, I'm referring to linguistic script theory, and I'm referencing Victor Raskin. I have a friend that's studying under him at Purdue University, and what this basically is that it talks about why humor works the way it does. And one of the things is that we all follow scripts in understanding and following those patterns. And what humor does, it's essentially problem solving. It distracts you. It goes off those patterns, off those scripts, and you have to fill in the blanks to figure out, wait a minute, something went wrong here, something went awry. Your brain does problem solving, makes the connection, and you get a positive effect, and you find the humor in something. Well, I'm relating that to, that's also the way really learning works, that what we do is we find a disconnect, and we automatically, our brains want to solve it. They want to make the connection. And that positive effect is we find that connection and, oh, we've learned. And that's why things like games and stuff, when you learn through games, you are distracted by that whole process of the game, but then you make that connection and realize, oh, I learned something. Now, this following script is exemplified by, it's interesting, I took a cartooning class years ago, and one of the things that came up when caricatures first start, when a new pundit starts on the scene, and this is a older cartoon of Obama, President Obama, and it shows that when a new pundit arrives on the scene, caricature, or cartoonists, I mean, kind of don't quite have a handle on how they should caricature that person. And what you'll see is a lot of different variants of that person. And eventually there becomes a common consensus of what standout features of the face there are to make it so that it's easily recognizable as the character of that person. And even though later on caricatures can be extremely warped, people agree that that's the things that we're looking for. In President Obama's case, it's the large ears, the way the jaw and the way the eyes and eyebrows are set in the face, and things like that. But it shows that there's this pattern that we come to a common understanding, or the scripts. Now, the next in neuroscience. Now, I'm not going to do a really good job of explaining this in the sense of going real deeply into it, but Patrick Crispin does a really good job of this at netsquirrel.com. And he has a PowerPoint available, and you can see that on the link that I have here. And it's why some of what we learned in school and practice in our EdTech classrooms may be bunk. And what he's talking about is, he's talking about how we learned a lot about multiple intelligences and learning styles, and how that doesn't hold up under the new technology of that has come into play with the study of neuroscience. As we can see the brain operating real time, we start seeing that our brains don't just operate from clear designated spots in the brain that we've identified as either different areas that the brain works from for learning styles, or for multiple intelligence. Like when we learn about music, our brain doesn't just pull from the music centers of our brain or the hearing centers of our brain. So when we learn about music, we don't just learn because of hearing, or if we have a multiple intelligence and we have a learning style or a multiple intelligence for hearing, we don't have to hear something necessarily to learn it. It's our brains fire off in all parts of the brain and utilize the brain fully all over the place. And so we're learning that those things aren't actually true. And that the brain is always trying to problem solve and always trying to look at different ways and pull from different parts of our understanding and the connections we have in our brain to basically problem solve. Now, that brings me to a little bit of the brain's plasticity. Also, we used to think that the brain would pretty much set in how it was formed after a certain age, that we grow up, and as a child, our brains are kind of malleable, and then they kind of get set. And we're learning that that's not the case. And even in catastrophic damage to the brain will still compensate and learn from other parts of the brain, will use other parts of the brain that normally aren't used for that kind of learning. And so the brain also in itself is always changing, or able to change, because of its plasticity. Now, this brings me finally to my learning theory that I'm calling the Fluxx learning theory, that learning occurs because we have prior knowledge we build on. Even if it's very minimal, it's still prior knowledge, and that our brains always want to problem solve. They always want to make that connection, and we're always trying to do that problem solving. But there's always situational or environmental change that is happening. We're always learning in a different situation, or things are changing, either environmentally with our brains or our environments and things like that. And so I guess the point that I am trying to make is that we do learn in all kinds of ways, whether it's behaviorally, whether it's constructivist thinking, whether it's whatever kind of learning theory you want to point to. Do we do those things? Yeah, we probably do. But it depends. It depends on the situation. It depends in the state of mind we're at. It depends in maybe even the time of day. I don't know. But the point is that our brains are always trying to make sense of the world around us. And we do these things. We pull these things together, and learning occurs because of that disconnect, like I talked about for script theory, in that there's that disconnect that our brains try to make that connection, and then learning occurs and we get that reward. And so I just was able to get this in under 10 minutes, so thank you very much.